Well, actually, I have to say, Jerry, thank you. I have to say my kids have gone on to wonderful accomplishments, and all based on their core foundation at Roosevelt, which I think is what we're all talking about. But I feel like I am in a room among friends. And just to say, like Tom Johnson and I started as young teachers in Lenox, right? And Jerry and I were principals together. Many of us have crossed our paths, and Greg, and some of the state work we do. So I'm here among friends, and will hopefully not let you get indigestion over your lunch as I speak about the work of COTSN and what we're doing at the state level and how that all combines. So anyway, thank you all for staying for lunch and for listening to me. So I want to talk about the priorities of this morning that Catherine laid out early on, which was the building capacity of teachers, expanding that school-wide, and then what do you do district-wide? And then I'm going to add on the statewide issues, since we are a big state, and that's clearly the policy area that I work a lot in right now. So you think back to the early days when I graduated from UCLA. I finished my credential in December. I was so excited to be an elementary teacher. It's something I'd wanted to do since I was in first grade. And in those years, there weren't like huge options for young girls. I just always wanted to be a teacher. And I went to the Teacher Placement Center at UCLA, and there was this job open in a district that I hadn't heard of before, but it wasn't that far from where I lived. And they had found some grant money. They had found some grant money to hire a teacher because their class sizes were so big in 4th and 5th grade. And so I came in December, I met the principal, and in January they told 4 teachers, 2 4th and 2 5th, so you can pick 8 kids apiece to send to the new teacher. And but they only had 1 room left, and remember, I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher, and they had a room left in the far corner of the school in the kindergarten yard. It's the empty room. And so the first day after Christmas vacation in January, not only do my kids find out they have a new teacher, they also have to come with their desks, because there were no desks in the room, and they had to come with their books and their materials. And there was my first year of teaching. And so let me just say, I was excited. It was hard work. It still is hard work. But in those years, it was pre-standards. It was pre-frameworks. There were no pacing guides. And honestly, there were no consistent books, so whatever they came with, that's what I used. And so no one ever came to see me because I was in the kindergarten yard in the corner. And so on yard duty or at an assembly, I would actually see people that I might have worked with. And about a week before the end of school, this principal said, so I need you to sign your evaluation. And really, it had been a kind of lonely existence out there, but I was so tired, I just was teaching. So, and then, just to cap off the beginning of my school year, I got a pink slip. And so I went to see the superintendent and said, I was crying, like, my husband's on active duty, I might need a job, what am I going to do? And he said, well, if you were my daughter, I would tell you to find another career. Well, the good news is, he wasn't my dad, and I didn't listen to him. So I stayed, and I got rehired again, and I've been really, really blessed with a wonderful, amazing career of growth and learning, elementary, middle, high school, and district level, and now very fortunate to be serving at the state level. And so let me just say, the reason I bring that up is that what we did then for teachers and what COTSN does today and what we do at schools and districts today and statewide is very different. We've learned something over the years. Not that we're perfect at it, but we're a lot better at it. And so I just thought about how important the elements of COTSN are to mentoring and supporting principals and working with instruction and providing a focus. And so I thought I would kind of contrast as I was thinking about how to open this, about how things had changed so much. Let me just say, today we're facing a huge teacher shortage, not a job shortage. And we're also facing huge turnovers for teachers in a way that we haven't seen before. So the number of people retiring out are far larger in size than the number that we're granting credentials for today. And so we're looking at what does the research say about teacher retention and support. And for those of us who love education and spent our lives doing it, what is the difference that makes a difference that keep people in the field? So I thought I might start with that. Let me just say, my experience in leading schools for more than 20 years is you can walk into a school and you can tell the difference. Those of you know what I mean. It feels different. It isn't isn't just that everybody's high-fiving and being friendly, it's what's going on in the classroom and the energy and the engagement. And the focus that Coatson has on that is phenomenal. I actually remember when Jerry first started in Coatson, and I've admired all the work that's happened to build the capacity of teachers who often become teacher leaders and leaders in the field, which is what we need to do to continue to transform education. The focus on professional development and the elements that Coatson bases the art of teaching on are elements that we actually see statewide as necessary, but not necessarily in place. Because what we know is you need capacity to build capacity. And in some places, there's long, sustained, Tustin's one good example, great capacity over a long period of time. But there are some districts in our state where within 3 to 5 years, all the leadership's gone, the teachers are turning over a lot, they're hard to fill, they're rural areas. People get recruited from very cold states and come to California and find themselves in Central Valley. It wasn't quite what they thought when they thought they were coming to California. So we have some elements that we have discovered that make a really big difference in retaining, supporting teachers to become quality educators, but retaining them. And retaining them that builds stability, and retaining leaders that build stability. So I thought I might focus on 3 areas. The area of coaching, the areas of collaboration, and the issue of networks. Just because I think that you've touched on it, you've heard about it here, and it might reinforce as you think about it. So I think there's a table talk right after me on sort of what are next steps for you particularly. So when I was, so I love being a principal, it's my favorite job, although I have a friend in West Ed who said, why would you ever want to do that job? It's like the person in the middle. I said, I know, but a strong principal, you can really make a difference in a school. So I was at Lincoln Middle School for 16 years, so several cycles. Gene Tucker, who at the time had hired me, said to me, I would have never kept you that long in one place. But the truth is that it was several cycles of leadership at that time. What I will tell you is the best work I ever did as a principal was when I was coached. So I was very, very fortunate. So I was involved in the Coalition of Essential Schools, as Jerry talked about. And that provided not only, it provided a national network that was outside of my school district. So you know, as principals and superintendents, you're in a district principals meeting, and that has its own district politics and issues. And but when you go to a network meeting, you leave that behind and you focus on it. So for weeks during the summer, every summer for 7 years, we learned protocols, we did the protocols, we practiced them. So then when I went back to the school, I mean the coalition was based at Brown, but when I went back to my school, I could do those. You can't just give a principal a protocol and say, do this with your teachers. You have to have done it and experienced it, just like teachers have to practice it before they go do it in their classroom. And so that network provided for me the kind of support and growth and opportunity that didn't have the local politics in it, and definitely allowed me to build my own capacity. That's what Coatson does for teachers and leaders here. They bring people together to talk about the art of teaching. The state is very, very committed to the network approach. We're kind of approaching it differently. So just like Catherine's chart, which showed you the top-down way versus how Coatson's trying to do it, we are statewide taking a lot of those theories as well, so we're embracing that in our system of support. So last year, the state, through the California Collaborative for Education, funded 59 networks. With that idea, a lot of focus around network improvement communities. Some of the core districts, the large districts like Long Beach, LA, Santa Ana, they're involved in these networks. And they're looking at particular focus. So just as Coatson has a coherent focus on particular small set of, that's what the networks are. The networks don't just focus on general teaching. One might be English learner focus only. One might be multi-tiered system of student support. That's the one coming out of Orange County, really strong network. Those network communities applied for the grants and were vetted through the California Collaborative. And there are some that are based in county offices. There's an English learner one that's based at Stanford, but builds on the network model to build support and collaboration. So many of you may be in different networks other than just Coatson, but what we found is an opportunity to come together across the state around a common focus, just like Coatson's talking about a common focus. So these principles are really threaded throughout what we know is good, effective professional development for teachers and for leaders and for sustaining long-term change. The other thing I want to talk about is collaboration. So in the early days, we were one of the early schools that did a late start, and we've gone to that as much more common practice in most schools around trying to find collaboration time. But the difference is, it's not just collaboration time, you guys just meet and do whatever you want, which does happen some places, I will just say, and sometimes in fact it's been negotiated in a union contract that you can't even tell them what to do. But as your program focuses on, the collaboration time is focused on a particular teaching practice. So what we discovered, and I didn't run them all, well teachers will tell you, sit and get faculty meetings don't work, especially if the administrator's running them. And I would just say, as a long-term administrator, I worked really hard to try to make really good faculty meetings. There was something posted on Facebook just last week, I think, that said, why would you ever arm teachers with guns, especially if you're the principal running the faculty meeting? I thought that was kind of funny. It's like, you know, we try to do our best. And I would say, if you're a district administrator running a meeting with principals, it's sort of the same thing. Like, how do you make it, like, engaging, right? So the thing that we did that I think is really an element here in the work that you're all involved in is there's focused collaboration time, but it's focused. So whether it was my 7th grade teachers coming together to norm writing, or whether it was my math teachers watching a math practice, they were working together, focused, and it was breaking down that isolation that the classroom has. So one of the things we're finding is that if teachers can work together around a focused target and then observe each other and give feedback, they grow. And that's a really strong element that you build into your program. So let me just say that active learning around collaboration, I have found teachers to rise up. And so just as you talked today about how do you expand school-wide and then district-wide, so people will say over time, not in the early couple years when they were trying to figure out what the principal was doing with that junior high and making it a middle school, but over time, people got hired, much like you heard our panel talk about. When you heard your principals talk about it, you heard your superintendents talk about it. When you get hired, this is how we work in our district. When you get hired, this is how we work in our school. You're part of a community, this is what you're going to be doing. And so just as that model, I would just encourage you, whatever role you're in, where you're bringing new people in, that's the norm under which you come in. So when you got hired in our school, we watch you teach. That's what you're being hired for, not how good you interview, but how well you teach. And the team that you're going to work on, they watch you. And what Jerry told me is when you're opting into Coatson, they come watch you to make sure. So that model of telling to people, it's not an isolated process. What you do, it matters to us, and we're going to work with you, but we want to see you teach. And I would say mostly it matches, but doesn't always match, you know, if you hire people. Sometimes you're a great interviewer or not. It's what you do with kids where you come alive. So I would say that use of the collaboration time we know is really, really important. So I want to move quickly to the idea of leaders, because what we know is there's virtually no undocumented instance of a troubled school being turned around without intervention of a powerful leader. That really, really matters. And that on-the-job coaching and mentoring have long been recognized as practices that improve leader effectiveness. So as I said, when I was a middle school principal, I was very, very fortunate, and actually, God bless me, you might not know Don Shelby, who's the founder of Aspire Public Schools and is with Gates, but he was my coach as a middle school principal, so I got really, really lucky. And I learned how to do instructional walkthroughs with a non-threatening, collaborative. Those were before we were titled PLCs. That was our professional learning time. And if you work in PLCs, you know they take a while to mature. And Don taught me that and collaborated with me. So I'm just going to say, so when John Dacey at the time was the superintendent of Santa Monica, Malibu, and said, so you need to be the principal at Santa Monica High School. That was like the 4th superintendent who said, you really should be a high school principal. And with John's amazing, and he's motivating, and he's morally committed, but you don't say no, John. And so I became the high school principal. Jerry knew me, I used to say I was really tall when I got that job. It was a really challenging job. But at the same thing, you build on what you know. So just as teachers build on what they know and principals build on what they know, we took Santa Monica High School with the idea of 3,500 kids breaking break it into small teams. And I said to John, I won't do that job without a coach. And so let me say, we didn't have money in those days. In most of these years, there was not a lot of money, but I was fortunate, and Paula Evans from the Coalition of Central Schools was my coach because I knew I needed that collaborative partner. So one of the things I want to reinforce is the coach is so essential. And I heard, I think it was Greg saying in Tustin that you've committed to the role of coach as much as many of the superintendents have. And I can't tell you how important that is, not just the teacher model, but as the leaders supporting the teachers, they need that support. And having met with several large urban superintendents in California, they said, don't forget our district admin team. They're the ones supporting, principals supporting teachers. So the coaching model for me is such a strong element of to continue that focus. And even as I, in my free time, coach a few principals, I think some of it's kind of checking in regularly. I'm back again, here I am. And also kind of let's go into classrooms. Let's take a look at the feedbacks. Just as you coach teachers through Coatson on how to look at lesson elements and what it looks like and to reflect, look at the video. Well, so with principals, we've learned that we might have not, well, I'll give you a good example. The next generation science standards are completely new. They're the first science standards we've had in about 20 years. We know a little bit more about science than we used to know. And so they're organized very differently. There's cross-cutting concepts, engineering practices are through that. And so we have a project called the Next Generation Science Standards Early Implementers, and it's working with teachers in K-8 to learn how to implement the new science. But there's a leader strand, which actually the science coach coaches the principal to go into classrooms to actually learn and be able to recognize it and then give feedback, because they weren't trained in NGSS, they don't know it. So again, we have to help leaders understand how to recognize. So just as you were talking on the slides today about how the principal needs to go to the professional development, they need to go for more than just checking in and going back to their office to check their email. They need to be there enough. They don't have to be a science teacher or a math teacher, but they need to be able to know enough to not say, Catherine, that was a really good lesson. Or Tom, what are you thinking about next? You need to be able to ask deeper, just like you coach your coaches, you need to coach your principals to know how to support teachers as well. And teachers would say they want that feedback as well. We know that leaders have to build communities of teachers who support the development of students' academic, social, and emotional needs. And so we have to help. There's so many changing populations in the state of California right now. We have so many areas that we're trying to focus on. But I appreciated so much the focus that Coatson's talking about and that the superintendents talked about of trying to stay coherent. Because one of the things that we hear statewide is there are so many initiatives. And if you talk to principals, they'll say not only are there so many state initiatives, there's so many district initiatives. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is work with some principals to say, okay, what are all the district initiatives? What are all the site initiatives? And where can you find your thread? Just like you're doing with your teachers. And what do you do at faculty meetings? What do you do at professional learning opportunities? What do you tell parents that you're focusing on? So we have to build that coherence theme that you're building on in your work through Coatson in our work. Because the research says if you do all these initiatives, you'll do nothing very well. So you've got to do some well, less is more, and build on that. And I heard the theme of the leaders, and I think Julie Mitchell was talking about that as well, about trying to figure out the site focus and making that the site decision. But that is so important. And I appreciated what Greg said about just pick something. If you work on teaching and getting better, you'll get better. And so just that idea of stopping for a minute, just like here today. You stop for a minute, you already checked your email, and you just think about the issues, and you go back and you do all the stuff that life at schools and districts do. And so I think the idea of bringing the networks to support, the commitment of bringing together collaborative around the focus of teaching and student achievement is just such an important element. And we're trying very, very hard to build our state strategy on that. So thinking about the scale across your school district, we think about the scale across the state. So you may know with more than 6.2 million kids, we have over 10,000 schools. More than 1,000 local education agencies, plus all the charters as well. So each, and we have 58 counties in the state of California. So if you take LA County, 25% of all the kids in the state of California. So the LA LA County office, I've worked in LA County my whole life, they can't support 25%. They just don't have that kind of capacity. So Coatson and Bechtel and Stewart and Hewlett and different places and the California Collaborative, they provide in county offices different networks that districts choose to look at for support. So I can't support enough the commitment of Coatson to support the opportunity to focus on teaching and learning, because we have to look in a very urban area where we are right now, where do you go to get the support that you need? In Northern California, you might have 6 or 7 counties you have to go across to get to the math coach or the science coach you need. So lots of districts and leaders look to networks like this where you can apply for support and get that focused support. It will make a difference long term for kids. So when we think about, I was talking at lunch about the idea that in Coatson it's wonderful, it's opting in. So that's great because everyone's here because you want to be. And by the way, I stayed a long time in one particular school at Lincoln. It got to the point where you had to be good because that was the standard. When you went into 7th grade English language arts, that's what everyone was doing. And I saw it over time. And so I guess my message is we really need to stay the course on this. Just don't do it for a couple years. That starts it and it builds a foundation. But we need to continue because it does have the impact. And those of us who've been in this a while, you see schools and energies really, really start to change. So as I close and think about it, one of the things we've seen is the lesson study model that many of you are involved in as the most impactful in changing practice. So you've heard about it through the Coatson slides and the presentations of having people plan a lesson, go and watch each other teach, then debrief it, and then teach it again. And sometimes they teach it a 3rd time. So it is labor intensive, but it does make the biggest difference in teacher practice. So that opportunity to break down the walls, have someone watch you, have you watch somebody else, and I know you also video teachers as well, it is an amazing way to improve and grow the art of teaching. And so as you think about your next steps, I would think it's expensive. Although I did hear that there's a lot of money in the budget and there's some negotiations going on statewide, and that the governor always comes in conservative in January and that might have more money. And I've heard there's a real push actually to increase the base, which we hope is true. But as you think about how you spend your money, I would say it's not the large amount of money, it's how you use your money. So I would say it's around collaborative time, and it might be 3 sub-days for the math department. It might be 4 sub-days for the science with coaching and collaboration and focus, so that you spend your money to get the best bang for your buck and really try to impact long term. So I would say also statewide, I just wanted to kind of leave you with some big ideas that we're looking at. Next week is one of our longer state board meetings as we try to reconcile the California way and our direction in accountability, and what the feds have interpreted the law to be different than us. So in your free time you can follow along with next week. But anyway, this is what we're focused on in California and what our priorities are. We are saying first, core instruction for all kids in the classroom, most important. That's everybody in the classroom. That's not sending the special ed kids out, the English learners out. That's helping teachers be really good at all the different learning that they have in front of them. That's what we're saying. We're saying in looking at investing in capacity so that teachers have the skills and don't need to have someone do what they don't know how to do. We're talking about credentialing-wise, even for special ed teachers, that they have a common core of training before they specialize. And then we're also saying that at the state level, we're providing standards, which we update. We're providing frameworks, which are great resources. They have vignettes and snapshots that actually show you how the lessons come to be. And then we do a recommended list K-8 of materials. So let me just say, don't buy the materials so fast, in my opinion. The thing that we've learned is if you spend time learning the framework during professional development, understanding what a literacy lesson looks like, understanding how literacy is embedded in history and in science, when you go to look at the materials, you're a better consumer. And the people who bought math materials too early, they learned they bought them too early and they weren't quite aligned. So as you look at all these initiatives, take your time, keep your focus on what you're focused on, so that when you give people new resources, they will understand how it meets the standards. And I just would say, for elementary teachers, which is the focus, there's a lot of stuff going on for elementary. Every year a new framework. And the literacy support that you're doing will be a common connector across history, across science. It is the one that I think you could grow and make a difference no matter what, as Greg was saying. We are having some priorities at the state, you might have noticed. So special ed is a big priority for us, and many of the districts that were identified for additional support were identified for special ed. But those students are often English learners, they're also foster youth, they're also socioeconomically disadvantaged. So we're finding that there's similar groups of kids, and we need to really drill deeper to look at what we do for all kids, what we do for some kids, and what we do for a few. And that's the same approach that we're taking, what we do for all schools, what we do for some schools, what we do for a few, and what we do for all districts, what counties provide for all districts, what they do for a few that need support, and what a few that need intensive support. So that multi-tiered support is our approach for kids, schools, and districts, and we're trying very hard to keep that as our theme in our state plan as well. My final comment would be, you got to stay the course. This is a long-term process. The change that I saw at Lincoln, you don't have to stay 16 years like I did at Lincoln, or 25, I think Jerry stayed at Roosevelt. But we saw a long-term substantial change in our schools because we stayed the course, and we stayed in investing in teachers and doing the work every single day. The conferences are great, but just as you heard from some of the superintendents, when they come back, they have to meet together to talk about what they're doing. The best use of your money is to invest in the capacity of teaching, of time, but focus during their collaboration time, and you'll begin to, we've seen the change over time. So let me just say with a final quote, this was in Ed Week last week, and it said, leaders must build within their faculty, staff, parents, students, a belief that they have the capacity to support with resources necessary to implement essential changes in curricular, culture, and instruction. So we have to stay focused on that. So I want to thank all of you for what you're doing every day for our students, for our teachers, and for our leaders, so that all of our kids graduate college and career ready. And I think the lessons that we're learning through the art of teaching and the research studies that you're doing, they will really help inform your practices across your schools and across your districts and for our schools statewide. It's our future. It's our kids, it's our grandkids, it is our future, and it's the right work to be doing. So thank you all for listening to me. I hope it was really helpful, that I gave you some ideas to really think about. Thank you.